Good evening, YouTube, and welcome. Tonight, we have a special guest tonight with us, Gemini Reads. We're both going to read some messed up stories that we found on the internet. So, you've been warned. Also, if you guys can hit that subscribe button and help me reach 1,000 subscribers, it would honestly make me really happy. Thank you so much. These stories contain horrific dark web activities, drug use, violence, and gore. Listener discretion is advised. Most of this night, I honestly don't recall and had to piece together slowly over the week by myself, friends, and a police report. It started out just like any other night. We were hanging out at my friend's place. That summer we spent a lot of time at his place, smoking pot, drinking, and just generally having fun, since it was the summer after all, and we just graduated. We got bored one night, and after smoking a few bowls and one of my friends mentioned Dramamine. Having never heard of this being used in terms of a drug, we decided to give it a shot. It was probably around 8 o'clock at night, and we drove to a store and picked up some bottles for each of us. There were 3 of us, by the way, so we went back to hang out to our place, and all of us took what we had. We threw a movie, sat back, and enjoyed it. It was probably around 15 to 20 minutes for it to hit me. I can't remember much of being in the apartment, aside from talking to my friend's mom and all sorts of gibberish and noticing lots of changes in the light and shadows. One of the guys decided to leave because he was just tired and it wasn't doing much to him. We later discovered that he was driving home and he kept swerving and missing imaginary semi-trucks, and once he got home, he sat in the darkness of his room and had imaginary people talk to him. This guy was toasted. We'll call my friend Joe, and from here on out for reasons of privacy. So from what Joe told me the next day, I sat on the couch in his apartment and talked to him as if he was an employee at a local bookstore where I worked at. Most of what I said was just total gibberish and just quiet mumbling. Yet, at all times, I thought I was speaking very clearly in my mind. After a while, I got up and tried to pick up a plant that was behind the couch, saying that it wasn't supposed to be there, so I had to get rid of it. Joe finally got me to calm down about that and sat me down on the couch, where I started to talk about how I unalived them and hid their bones in the basement. From what he told me, that I'd completely changed when I spoke of that. I had an evil tone in my voice and kept talking about how they deserved death that I gave them and how I butchered their bodies. So, at that point, he freaked out. The drug didn't seem to affect him at all that much, and all he wanted to do was just get us out of the house. So we decided to leave and go to a local coffee shop. Bad idea. I wound up nearly killing us because I failed to recognize that I was driving around 40 miles per hour right at the flatbed trailer. He decided it was time for him to drive because I just couldn't handle it. I guess that's when I really started to freak out. He pulled into the parking place across the street from the coffee house, and I guess in my mind I thought the car wasn't stopping, and I freaked out and began stomping my feet onto the floorboards of the car and smashing my hands on the dashboard in a frantic attempt to try to stop the car. For some odd reason, even at all that, we decided to go and get some coffee at the coffee house. We got in, and everything seemed to get a bit better. I felt like I was starting to regain control of myself. Unknowns to me, the worst had yet to come. I wound up standing on the stairs of the upper floor of the coffee house for about 5 minutes, staring blankly at nothing, until Joe realized that I wasn't with them, and he came back down to get me. As we passed a group of people around our age, Joe said that I walked up to them, to a random girl, and just started talking to her as if I'd known her for years. She got worried about me for some reason that I'll never understand and asked Joe if I was alright and if I needed to sit down. Joe claimed that I was okay. We need to head out to the balcony for a smoke. From here on out, this is where things started to get to me. I had really hallucinated much before this point in the night. I wound up lighting a cigarette and dropping it at some point into the metal grate balcony, and I spent around 20 minutes on my hands and knees trying to search for this damn cigarette. From what Joe said, that I still had the cigarette in my mouth the entire time. So finally, after getting all sorts of disapproving looks from the owner and the employees, we decided to leave. Or rather, Joe decided to leave and I wandered along after him, confused as where I was. Now, from this point on, I remember nothing but very small pieces of time. I remember going back to Joe's place and deciding to leave, and getting into my car and backing up and leaving. From what Joe said, he and I got into an argument about me leaving, and I jumped into my car, threw it in reverse, backed up, and then turned the car off, and he took out the keys. He watched from a window in his apartment, came out and asked me what I was doing. I told him that I was leaving, and he explained to me that the keys wasn't even the ignition. So after a few times of this happening, I finally made it out of the apartment complex. I managed to only go down 100 yards down the road, because I managed to drive in between some construction barriers into a construction zone. As far as I could figure, I got out of my car to make sure it was okay. I locked it and threw the keys on a nearby barrier as I walked around the car looking at it. From there, I think I might have gotten confused as to why my car was locked and where my keys were, so I started to wander around town. I remember walking up to a house where I was knocking on the door, thinking that was one of my buddy's house. I was so wrapped in this fantasy world that I even saw my little brother let me in. From there, the police report details said that I was found in the family's home, standing in front of their fish tank, trying to open it to get some water because I was just so thirsty. The homeowner asked me what I was doing, and I replied that I was thirsty and wanted to get some water, so I came in to get a glass. She freaked out and told me to leave, and I wandered over their Christmas tree and plucked a bulb off the tree and turned to her, proclaiming that this was just so pretty and that I need to take this. From there, I remember some small tidbits of people yelling, "Call the cops! Call Grandpa! Get the hell out of my house!" and other numerous screams. I got scared, so I ran. They found me on the porch a few blocks away, crying and writing something on my imaginary pencil on some imaginary paper. The police cuffed me and questioned me, and all they got out of me was that it was 8 o'clock still, when it was actually around 11:30 now, and then I told them that I just left work a few moments ago. One of the officers also informed me that the next day that I repeatedly spoke to him, as if I was an employee of a bookstore, which I was an employee at, and if he thought that it was okay for me to get a cup of tea. They arrested me on the grounds that I had unlawfully entered a person's home, and that I was completely unaware to my surroundings, and I was a danger to myself and others. At this point, I remember a few things about being in a jailhouse. I remember sitting in the fingerprinting room, trying to read an issue of Cosmo that was sitting on my laptop, and the entire time, all the officers saw that I was handcuffed to my chair, trying to reach the magazine so I could turn the pages. I remember freaking out when the magazine fell off my lap and disappeared completely. That was the first time that I got scared, because I realized some of the drugs was still in me. So from there, they put me in a holding cell in which I saw about a half a dozen of my friends who were really there, held a conversation with one, told a really large, rather grizzly black man to shut the hell up and leave me alone, and then they had to remove me to put me to a different cell for my safety. An officer stated in the police report that I was removed from my cell, and saying that I was ranting and raving about dead bodies rising out of the floor, and how I thought the entire police precinct was positioned over a year to enter the gates of hell. I honestly can't remember anything else from the rest of that night, aside from one of the officers who decided to somewhat take me under his wing and make sure that I was okay. This guy was checking on me periodically. Around 11 to the next morning, my name was yelled through the intercom, and I woke up and rushed out of the cell, forgetting my shoes completely, which really pissed off one of the cops. So he told me to sign some papers, and I got confused because I asked him what they were for, because I did not want to sign any legal document without knowing what it was for. So he asked me if I want to stay here longer or get the hell out, so I quickly signed the papers. I was told to walk through the next 3 blue doors, and bam, I was outside the sunlight, groggy, sweaty, and totally unaware of what to do next. I had no idea where my car was, or how I even find it. Some bits and pieces of the night in the cell came back to me over the course of the next week. I remember a cold, disgusting breakfast, smoking numerous imaginary cigarettes, and then freaking out and crying that they disappeared when I realized that I was just hallucinating. I remember there being numerous other people in the cell with me. Over the course of the night, they were messing with me, and when I woke up the next morning, I thought I was going to be charged with 26 counts of manslaughter for driving my car into the school and assaulting a police officer. But in the end, I got a minor misdemeanor charge and a lot of probation. Sadly, I'm an idiot, and this wasn't my last encounter with Dramamine.
Last year I did something bad. I got onto the dark web with a few friends, and I'm telling you, it is real. There's a certain site that I'm not going to give the full name of. Let's just call it the Black Room. Me and my friends waited until our parents went to bed, and then all three of us pulled up chairs to this computer. It was a live streaming site that read something, but it translated to live preview in Serbian. There was a black screen and people were typing in a chat box in another language. We just watched and waited for something to happen. A topless woman with long brown dark hair appeared in the chair. She was wearing blue jeans. Her hands were tied with what looked like to be blue rope and duct tape around. I guess it was to make sure that she didn't get out. Her feet were cuffed with what looked like to be metal leg cuffs. She had a blank look on her face. The camera flashed off to dark again. It looked like someone was covering the camera with a towel. Then I heard the sick sound of a drill being turned on. The towel was removed. I heard her shouting in another language, probably begging for her life, screaming and crying, but she couldn't move. There was a shirtless man in a BDSM mask. If you don't know what that is, I suggest you looked it up. It was a black leather-looking mask with eye holes and a zipper, where you could unzip the mouth. She began screaming, and I wanted to turn away, but curiosity got the best of me. He put the fat metal tip of the drill straight into her damn eye. It made a sickening squishing sound, and she was moaning and screaming as the drill went directly through her eyeball. Dark red blood began oozing out, and it looked like the poor woman was going into shock. She was shaking so bad. The camera had zoomed in. Her eye was still attached, but had major blunt force trauma. It looked like a big black bloody hole. Her eye was half there somewhat. It was really hard to look at. Then the camera lens went black again. We heard two loud pops, sounding like a gun, and then it was silent. No more sound, no more video. The viewing was obviously over. Oh my God, I just told my friends. I just think that we witnessed a murder. They shot her. They really fucking shot her. My friends and I agreed that we should never watch anything like this again. I went home feeling completely disgusted with myself. I hoped and prayed that it wasn't real. Sadly, it may have been. I promised myself no more. I would never watch anything like that again. That lasted until about next weekend. Next Saturday night, after playing on the PS4 for a few hours, we began to get tired and smoked a few joints to wake up. Then my best friend we will call Rob suggested that we go again on the dark web. Rob is a computer genius and knows how to get onto the dark web so easily. He used a VPN. We decided to click on the Black Room again. Rob told me that only about 4% of the internet is visible and the other 96% remains on this deep web. That made me feel a little bit sick to my stomach. What a disturbing thought. It took a few hours, and the site wanted us to pay a little bit with Bitcoin, so we did. I don't even know how we easily got in the first time without paying. I guess we just got lucky, because they wanted us to pay next time. This time the screen was not black, and there was a concrete-looking room, and a bucket. A big heavy-set man had a white pillowcase around his head, and holes cut out where his mouth and eyes were. You could not see his face. He picked up the bucket and began laughing, showing us the bucket, and then showing us what was in the bucket. I almost threw up. This bucket was full of body parts. Human body parts just floating in a clotted red goop. I was assuming that it was coagulated blood. I just remember seeing bloody teeth. a few fingers, and what looked like to be a couple of eyeballs, or just what was left of them. This couldn't be real, I thought. But by the way that this man just laughed, it was not a joke. It had to be animal parts, I thought. Please let it be animal parts. The camera zoomed in on this bucket with a white piece of paper that read, "Victim number 12." It was written in a permanent marker. Was this the remains of some poor innocent soul who got brutalized like the first victim? Was this the remains of that poor lady that we saw last week? I had really hoped not. I wasn't prepared for what happened next. The screen went black again, and in the chair sat another woman. This time with blonde hair, and her eyes were covered in a black scarf. She was bound by her hands, her feet too, with the same thin blue rope. And I felt very sorry for her. Her waist was strapped in, with some sort of belt holding her down. A white sheet was hung over her behind her. I wanted to help her and felt like there was nothing I could do. The fat man began dipping his hands into this gooey mess and trying to shove it in this woman's mouth. She tried to hold her mouth shut, but the man got angrier and slapped her in the face. It sounded like he was trying to tell her, "Eat it, eat it." She began to chew and cry, and then vomiting the whole mess up on her pretty white silk blouse. The chat box was going wild. People were typing in different languages, and the chat box was just popping. Then I heard it. The cranking of a chainsaw. There, standing beside this poor girl, appeared the same man from the first video. He was holding a chainsaw, shirtless, black mask and all. I got an even more sickened feeling in my stomach. This is not gonna be good. I had seen what chainsaws do to people. Chainsaw accidents are horrible. I wanted to stop viewing right then and there, but my friends were eager to watch, and I didn't want to seem like a little wuss. She was screaming her guts out, flailing trying to get out of this chair. Good thing we all had our headphones on, because this was really, really loud. I watched in horror as he began to try to cut her arm off. The chainsaw went a little through, and then it kicked back in a jerking upward motion, coming close to knocking her attacker out. He must have hit her arm bone, I thought. I think this really angered him. I could hear him screaming in another language, so I assume he might have nicked himself by the chainsaw. Suddenly, he shoved the blade directly into her stomach area. He pushed and began to cut her upwards, vertically. Her faint screams muffled by the chainsaw. Droplets of blood began spraying all over the air, onto the sheet. Little pieces of meat and tissue flew all over him, and all over the room. She began convulsing. Her eyes rolled back, and she was gone. Just like that. The man slowly pulled away the chainsaw, and as he did, I could see what looked like to be her intestines hanging out. The screen went black. I ran to the bathroom to throw up. I think I threw up for about 15 minutes. I almost passed out. My friends laughed at me, and I knew behind the laughter, it disturbed them too. All I know now is there are some really sick people out there in different parts of the world that are willing to do anything on the web for money. These people have no heart. They have no souls. They are inhumane and sick in the head. So stay off the dark web. There are just some things that you can never forget that will disturb your mind forever. You will not be able to undo what you have seen. Remember that.
On a lazy weekend, I was bored out of my mind when I decided to install the Tor browser. The browser UI was not very different than any other search engine, but once I was in it, I didn't know what I was going to search for. Then I remembered something called Red Rooms. I typed Red Rooms and hit enter. Not living up to my expectations, few rooms painted with red color surfaces. It was very normal. Not the things I had heard. Some info about how to paint your wall came up. After clicking a few links, when I was disappointed, I just closed the browser and uninstalled it. The rest of the day just went on like that. But then, at night, when I was having dinner with my family, I received a text on WhatsApp from an unknown number. I noticed it was an international number. I searched it up on Truecaller. Then the number came up from Honduras. The text read, "Hey dear, how are you? Sorry, do I know you? It's better you don't know me, my love. Why are you texting me? I might have something you might fancy. See, I provided a service for people with different likes." What do you mean? Don't act so innocent, dear. I've read your search history. I know the things you like to see. I'm not an idiot. Stop bluffing. You visited ChatGPT at 4:16 p.m. today, didn't you? I was effing scared when I received that. On the screen, I see that he was typing. It went on for a while when this person sent me a 32-line cipher code. It was just letters with W, T, G, F, G, V, F, G, D, F. What is this? Go ahead and convert it into an ISO file and run it on Tor. You would be included in the room. Which room? He sent an image of just a red picture. I'm assuming he means red room. I instantly blocked the number and changed all my ID passwords, and I was just praying continuously. But the next thing that happened blew my mind. Even though I blocked him, I still received a message from the same number. LOL. Blocking won't work. Please leave me alone. I was just playing around. I don't want your services. Relax, kid. Relax, kid. You're missing out on a lot. I should warn. Please, just leave me alone. I'm really sorry. From that day, I didn't receive any messages, and I didn't dare to go find what lies in the dark corners of the internet.
For as long as I can remember, I've always wanted to help people, especially those that couldn't care for themselves. It wasn't until later in life that I decided to go back to school and become a certified nurse assistant in my state. Right after I completed my finals and clinicals, I was offered a job at the hospital in the city that I lived in. It was my first day on the job when I realized how dedicated and thin the thread of life and death truly is. The tech I had been following around for the day was showing me the ropes and where everything was located on the floor. Suddenly our pager started going off, and we knew that meant one thing: code blue. As we take off down the hall, she yells for me to grab the crash card on the other side of one of the nurse pods and bring it to the room where the code has been called. Doctors and nurses were running into the room as the patient lay motionless on his bed, his wife hysterically crying in the corner of the room. One of the nurses escorts her out as I wheel in the cart and get everything set up, awaiting the doctor's orders. One by one, we rotate performing CPR on the patient. What they won't tell you is, in any kind of these medical classes, is how hard you actually have to press into the chest cavity of somebody to get their heart to restart. You actually basically have to manually break the ribs of this person to even get remotely deep enough. Unfortunately, this is what has to be done in this situation. What they didn't tell us was the man had a heart catheter done at the time. The patient has to keep their arms and legs in one position and stay absolutely still to avoid ripping open that wound, which will cause the patient to bleed to death in a matter of minutes, if not seconds. As the next one in line to do the CPR starts, they start doing harder chest compressions. The patient's leg is starting to see blood from where the heart catheter had been done. Panic took over as I yelled for the doctor to come look. The look on his face said it all, and without thinking, I placed my hand over the now open wound to keep the patient from bleeding out. My hands were trembling from fear and the anxiety as they got a faint pulse and rushed him down to the ICU. All the while, my hand is applying pressure to keep this man from bleeding out. Blood is literally pouring all over my gloves and all over my scrubs as the ICU nurse quickly exchanges my hand with hers as they carry him away. All day long, I thought about that patient and I prayed that he was going to be okay. It wasn't until a month later I was given a letter from my boss on the floor. I thought for sure I was being sued for the patient dying under my watch at the hospital, but it was actually the exact opposite. It was a thank you note from the patient and his wife, telling me how grateful he was for me saving his life that day. This was the reason I wanted to be in the medical field to begin with. And although it isn't a scary story, it's something I'll carry with me for the rest of my life.
I grew up in Idaho in the 70s, and me and my childhood friend Joe were outside all the time. Joe lived in a farm that was bordered in a pretty big forest, and my parents would drop me off in the morning, and we would stay in the woods all weekend. We'd only come out for school. We'd love pretending that we're frontiersmen. We're building shelters, traps, practice making fires with sticks, the whole 9 yards. When we got into being in high school, we got this notion to pull a Stand By Me. This was based on the movie of the same name that just came out. The idea was that we walk on the railroad tracks out in the country, but instead of looking for a dead body, we find cool bridges to fish from and a camp a little ways off the tracks. Of course, we knew this was dangerous and would be likely trespassing, but hey, we were just kids. We had lots of fun. We did find beautiful rivers. We discovered bridges that no one wants to go on. At night, we camped in the woods just near the tracks and made small hidden fires. Nothing bad ever happened. It was idyllic. In fact, it was so fun that we did it multiple times. We'd never had a problem. After high school, me and Joe went our own ways. We both went home, but always stayed in touch and always tried to coordinate visits when we visit each other occasionally. Well, one summer in the mid-90s, it worked out that we were both in the same town for the week. We'd do stuff for the family in a day, and at night, we'd catch each other with drinks at the bar, or sit outside at Joe's house and run a fire and talk about the old days. One night, me and Joe got to talking about the Stand By Me trips. Well, nostalgia and beer is a hell of a mix. Soon, we decided to take a day, walk the trails, camp one night, walk home. The day came. We decided to get out early in the morning. We had my wife drop us off in our old spots where we had to start, right outside our hometown. She thought this was absolutely crazy and mentioned to tell us about it. When she pulled away, Joe suggested that instead of walking the usual route, we take the opposite direction, just to be adventurous. We knew the land very well. We had a map, so I give a what the hell, and we set off. The day went fine. It was fun and a little sad in a good way. We found a bridge and sat on the edge, smoked a joint, and moved on. We had no fishing gear, but we brought some canned food and other stuff. Before the night set in, we picked a spot to camp. It was a thick forested area, trees on every side of the train tracks, so you felt like you were in a tunnel. We had brought small hammocks to sleep on, but before we set them up, we decided to do a little scouting of the perimeter. Now, this is something that we used to do in the old days too. We'd walk around the area a little bit to make sure some dude's house wasn't just over the hill, and we're actually camping on their yard. We walked maybe about 100 feet or so into the woods up into a small incline. We figured that we didn't see anything on top of the small hill, so we thought we'd be fine. But when we got to the top, we saw an old building down at the bottom. About 100 yards into the woods, it was barely visible. We pondered over what to do. We both assumed that it was a sugar shack or something, because it didn't appear to be a clear road onto it. From where we were, there didn't look like anyone was in there either. All was quiet. No movement could be seen. No lights. We decided to walk a little closer to make sure. We came down the hill, very slowly. And as we were near the building, we saw that it wasn't a sugar shack at all. It was an old church. It looked like it had been abandoned for years. It was a squat, sagging building with those wooden planks that almost been black for years with moss and rot. A cross stood still on top of the place, also weathered black. None of the windows had glass. There were no doors, just open doorways. We got close enough to see the inside. There were rows of pews and built-up section on the front of the preacher's stand. We didn't go all the way in. We really didn't want to. Beyond all that, there was no signs of anyone else. No footprints, no paths, no roads. It was an abandoned church in the middle of the woods. We left immediately to went back up to the hill, to our spot where we camped. Having a hill between us and the church made us feel a bit better, but we were still a little bit uneasy. We chalked it up that it was just a natural creepiness that we saw a little church in the middle of the woods. Besides, at this point it was dusk, and we decided to rig up our hammocks and go to sleep and move in early in the morning. The night set in, and as we lay in our hammocks and shot the shit, we began to hear something in the direction of the church. Our conversations went around like, "Do you hear that? The fuck is that? It sounds like people are singing?" And it did sound like someone was singing. We both slid out right in our hammocks and hunkered down, straining to hear more. We listened for a minute or two, and the singing continued, but it wasn't getting louder. Finally, we decided to creep up into the hill to see if we could spy where the sound was coming from. We could still move very quietly in the woods from the old days. It was second nature for us. The moon was barely out. It provided enough light to see that you wouldn't walk right into a tree, but it was near pitch black. We didn't use flashlights as we slowly went up the hill, and we didn't talk. When we got up to the top, we saw light in the distance. It was coming from the church, and the singing was coming from the inside. Joe and I put our heads together and had a hushed conversation that boiled down to, "Can you believe this shit?" The light looked to be a candlelight from the way it flickered, and though we tried, we couldn't make out what was being sung. It sounded like church music, but in a different language. We sat and watched for a while, trying to see who was in there, but we only saw occasional shadows. We had no intention of getting closer either. We had about a football field length between us, and we kept aiming it to keep it that way. The singing continued for a bit, and then stopped. After that, a booming male voice began to chant. I was already freaked out, but the voice already scared the shit out of me. It sounded like an Old Testament preacher that you see in the movies, but again, it was like he was speaking a different language because we could not understand a single word that he was saying. Eventually, it got where the single male voice would say something, and then a bunch of voices would answer in a song. This lasted for a while, and then they all broke into this long, unstained wail that kept getting louder and louder. It got so loud, so disturbing that I had to cover my ears. Then, it stopped. At this point, I was just getting ready to say, "Let's get the fuck out of here," when Joe put a hand on my shoulder and hissed, "They're coming out." We were far enough away that we couldn't make them out really well, but what we could see was a line of figures walk out of the doorway, holding hands in a single file. We could see some of them had flashlights. They began to sing again, and the light from the flashlights began to move towards us and the hill. We got scared, so we booked it down to our campsite. We grabbed all our shit and ran down to the tracks. Once there, we ran down the tracks in the direction that we came from. After a few minutes, we stopped to look back. We saw lights coming down from the hill. They were moving erratically like whoever was holding them was shaking them. We continued to run in spurts and walk as fast as we could. We eventually stopped seeing the lights that came from the road. By our map, we knew a small town was about 15 minutes down it, and we walked there. We got to a 24-hour gas station, and I called my wife to come get us. My wife and other friends just thought that these were just some kids messing around, but I heard those voices, and they sure as hell did not sound like kids. I'm not sure who those people were, but it definitely was the creepiest thing that has ever happened to me out in the woods.
I just want to say that I am not entirely sure that this is a skinwalker since I live in Australia, but what we encountered seems close enough to say that it is, and how I described it as a skinwalker. Okay, so it was the summer of 2015. My buddy, who I will call P, and his older yet still teenage cousin, who happened to be staying at his place, whom I will call L, were hanging out at his place since we were on school break. We were both in high school, and I don't know if any of you guys know how Australia has summertime around the same time as Christmas. So naturally, being a few days near Christmas, that was all we would talk about, asking about what we were planning on doing, our presents, our family members, etc. Eventually, P's mom told us to leave and take the dog on a walk. We thought that it was a bit strange since she usually only lets us go into the backyard by his old treehouse and his pool so that she could keep an eye on us, especially when P's dad was away on a business trip, like it was on this day. But we did. For reference, P has 2 dogs, a male golden retriever and a female Caucasian shepherd. I will not say their names, but both dogs are quite long-haired, and since Australia's sun is quite hot, they had to get their hair cut down so that they could actually survive this Australian sun. This information is somewhat needed for later in the story. So, anyway, we began to walk them, and after a while, since it was hot, Elle said that we should take a trail in the nearby brush so that we could get some shade. We all agreed and we went into this bush. For reference, the bush is basically the Australian version of the woods. Usually in the summers you don't go into the bush due to snakes, but we were young and wanted to get out of the sun, so we just went. Anyway, after about 10 minutes of walking in the bush, both dogs stopped. The golden retriever starts whimpering and tries to run away, and the Caucasian shepherd stands her ground, simultaneously sniffing in the air, then growling. Elle thought that the golden retriever might have been bitten by a snake. Now, like I said before, both breeds usually have long hair to somewhat protect them from snake bites. But since it was the summer and their hair was short, this is a problem, and they would need to be taken to the vet immediately. Elle quickly checked and couldn't see anything. But as I looked around on the ground for snakes, wishing that we didn't come here, I saw. At first I thought it was either a kangaroo or a large dog, which was about 17 meters, which in USA mathematics is about 55 feet and 9 inches. It was acting odd as it had its back against the tree, arms crossed like a human, just watching us. Kangaroos just usually lay down if they are tired or something, but this thing was upright laying on the tree. So I yelled out to them, "What is that kangaroo doing?" B and Dal looked over and saw it both. Said something along the lines of, "That ain't no kangaroo, mate." They were right, because it saw that we saw it, and after looking at it, I describe it as a tall man-kangaroo hybrid thing. Arms like a man and small claws on his fingers, yet legs like a kangaroo, an extremely light brown coat. Face was similar to that of a kangaroo, but also was a bit square-shaped, like a mastiff dog. It both simultaneously ran and hopped as it came towards us. I think that it only attacked because we all saw it, as it looked predatory. And when we spotted it, almost like it was minding its own business. And when it saw us see it, then it thought that we were a threat or something. We didn't really have time to run, only making it 2 steps back before it was right in front of us. It lunged at me, but just as it knocked me to the ground, the Caucasian shepherd jumped up, biting its arm. P fell forward and let the dog's lead go, and let the dog do what it had to do. Since a Caucasian shepherd dog can have the bite force of 700 psi, which for reference, a lion only has the bite force of 650 psi, you know that this creature was truly in pain when it let out a yell, sounding similar to that of a dog whimpering in pain, as the Caucasian shepherd's jaw clamped down on the arm. The creature then began to claw at the Caucasian shepherd with its free hand. Usually this wouldn't be a problem for the Caucasian shepherd, as their long fur would act as a shield against their skin when they fight wolves in Russia. But since it was the summertime again, her neck and body were exposed, since the fur was too short. I was basically pinned in the ground, as the two were fighting above me. The Caucasian shepherd did manage to move from the arm to the neck of this creature, but this somehow didn't kill this creature. The creature yelled out in pain since the Caucasian Shepherd was too weak from its injuries really to continue the bite around the neck. The creature managed to push the Caucasian Shepherd off its neck. It looked like the fight was about to turn in favor for the creature, but Elle grabbed a large stick nearby and swung it at the back of the creature's ear, which barely did anything as the creature turned around towards him, grabbing the stick from Elle when he swung it the second time. This allowed the Caucasian Shepherd to jump onto the creature and sink another bite into the creature's shoulder. Clearly too injured to continue, the creature got the Caucasian Shepherd off before it ran and hopped away into the brush, out of sight. We all ran out of the bush as fast as we could, just to get back to P's house. P and L were crying as I was limping, barely able to keep up. We didn't care that we entered the house. We needed an adult. So P ran upstairs to get his mom from the room, as L was checking my cuts and the Caucasian's wounds. But all we heard from upstairs was screaming from P's mom. She brought him downstairs by the ear, wearing lingerie, and a man in his underwear, who was not P's father, walking down the stairs behind her. She was pissed, Audi slang referring to somebody being either drunk or extremely angry. In this case, she was not drunk, but after seeing the Caucasian Shepherd's injuries and the scratches, she calmed down and told the male to leave, which he accepted and quickly went back upstairs to get his things before leaving. She quickly changed. It was Elle who had told her what had happened, and simply said that it was a large feral dog. She believed him, and she then took the Caucasian Shepherd to the vet, while Elle took me to a doctor, since he had a car. The Caucasian Shepherd unfortunately died in 2019, not due to her injuries, while the Golden Retriever is still alive and well. P and L said nothing about P's mother and that whole situation to P's father, but he had somehow found out around New Year's and filed for a divorce. I don't know much about the divorce besides the fact that P's mother hit P's dad with an AVO that he did not deserve. AVO is kind of like a restraining order, naturally causing issues in the divorce. As for the creature itself, after doing some research online and watching some YouTube videos, like that of the channels of Mr. Ballin, What Larks Benefit, Mr. Nightmare, Darkness Prevails, the most likely thing that it could be has to be a skinwalker. But I do have my doubts as I live in Australia and not the USA. So honestly, I don't know what we encountered. But what I do know is that when I decide to get a dog, the Caucasian Shepherd is in my top 10 for obvious reasons.